Hey, I'm Bob at ILikeToMakeStuff. Today we're going to make the Billy Club from Daredevil. When I was in college, I read a whole lot of the Daredevil comic book, and so I was really excited when Netflix came out with the show. And in that show, he's got a billy club that turns into nunchucks. I've always wanted to make them, so that's what we're going to do.
We started out by milling down an old piece of lumber into a square piece of stock. Josh did the preparation on this piece of wood, and he also did an entire bits video on the milling process. Be sure to check it out. Once it was down to a square piece of stock, we found the middle point and then cut it in half on the table saw. We needed to add a groove down the center of this to hold the wire later on. So we lowered the blade to about 1/8 of an inch and ran each piece over. This made a small groove in each one of the pieces that would line up when you put the two pieces back together. After we made sure that those lined up, we just glued both pieces back into a single block. We talked about a lot of different ways that the two pieces of the billy club could connect, and we ended up going with a very short screw. Josh modeled up two connectors with small threads that would let the two pieces connect. We printed out several different versions of this and finally ended up on one that twisted together really smoothly.
All right, next up we're going to take the steel pipe, cut it down to a length that's easier to work with. Then we will take it to the metal lathe and put some grooves in it. Now that I've got a smaller piece, I'm going to cut it down to two pieces that are closer to the actual final size and leave a little bit extra so we can chuck it up in the lathe. But the first thing is to clean off these ends that were cut somewhere else and are pretty gnarly and get them perfectly flat.
I got one of these pieces chucked up in the lathe and then marked out the areas where I needed to put the groove. I started the process using the tools and it was going really slowly. I wasn't sure if I was doing something wrong, so I decided to try a different method with a file. The file was great for getting the groove started, and then I grabbed a hacksaw just to see if that would make it go faster. Oddly enough, it did. I think it's also important to point out that this footage is sped up a whole lot. It was moving way slower than it looks.
All right, I know that that's probably not the way that everybody would do this. It's probably not the correct way to do this, I understand. Getting those little lines in there with the traditional tools, I just had a hard time. It didn't seem like it was wanting to dig in. Maybe the tools I have are not sharp, I'm not really sure. But by turning the lathe all the way down in speed, I was able to control how much of a groove I was cutting with the files, and it seemed to work. Now the big thing that may not have translated on camera is that it probably looked like my hands were really close to the chuck. I was being very careful to make sure that everything was away from the chuck so that nothing got pulled into it. Just be aware of that. And also the lathe was moving really slowly. All right, so I've got these two grooves in, these two up here, and now I just have to cut off where that third line is, and this piece should be about done.
I used a belt grinder to add a small chamfer to the end of these. You also could have done that on the lathe. After that, I used a polishing wheel to clean up the outside surface. After I had all the details on the pipe finished, it was time to prep the wood for turning. I ran this through the table saw with the blade at 45 degrees to knock off the corners. This just makes it faster to turn.
Now that we got these connectors done, we got to turn down the wood to fit on the inside. It's actually going to have to fit into a 3D printed piece, but first we need to figure out the outside diameter of this and turn down the wood to match.
The first step here was to knock off all the corners and turn it down to a cylinder. And once I got to that point, I took one little section and turned it down to its final diameter. The calipers are great for being able to find a diameter that you want to get to on the lathe, and once you've got it, you can reuse those calipers to get a bunch of other identical cuts. Then I connected all those cuts to get a surface that was roughly the same diameter. To fully smooth it out, I covered a flat piece of wood with spray adhesive and then put on some sandpaper. This allowed me to sand the entire surface at one time to even it out.
Big thanks to Casper for sponsoring this video. You may be wondering why a mattress company would sponsor a video like this, but the fact is our entire family sleeps on their mattresses and we love them. It's a really awesome system because they ship you the mattress in a box. You can open it in your house and sleep on it there for 100 nights. If you don't like it for any reason whatsoever, they will come take it away and give you your money back. They're designed and assembled here in the US. You get free shipping to the US and Canada. Be sure to go check them out. They are fantastic mattresses. They've got 3 different models for you to check out: the Wave, the Essential, and the Casper. And if you go to casper.com/ILTMS, you can compare those and figure out which one works best for you. Not only do they have mattresses, but they have pillows and bedding and a bunch of other stuff. So go to casper.com/ILTMS, use the code ILTMS, and you get $50 off your next mattress purchase. Seriously, it's a great product. Go check them out. Thanks, Casper. I got these both turned down to their final shapes and sizes. We did a test fit with all the other pieces. Everything's looking good, and now it's time to dye these red. Now, depending on if you're looking at the TV show or the comic book, these are different shades of red or different colors, but I'm just gonna make them bright red. To dye these, I'm gonna use RIT dye. This is a fabric dye. I'm gonna pour this in and then fill up the rest of the container with water to make sure that everything is submerged. I did some tests with some stains or dyes. This stuff worked pretty well. Both of those pieces have been in this dye for about 5 hours throughout the entire afternoon, and we're gonna pull them out. Look at that. That is pretty awesome. I'm gonna let these kind of drip dry in here to get rid of most of it, and then just stand them up on some wax paper for them to dry out fully. All right, it's the next day and the dye has dried. Now these things turned out really, really good. I love the color, it's perfect, but there is a downside to leaving these soaking for such a long time. The wood soaked up so much water that it did expand a bit, so the pieces that we already made to fit don't actually fit anymore. It's not a big deal because this is all gonna be covered so we can turn these down to fit again, but it did also raise the grain across the wood, so we're gonna have to figure that out as well. So the next step is to turn down these pieces that have to fit into something else to make sure that everything will fit correctly. Also, it has the dye on the surface, and if you touch it like this, it will get on your hands, which is why I'm wearing gloves. Eventually, we'll cover the whole thing with polyurethane. All right, we finally got all the pieces ready to put this thing together, and I'm really excited, but we didn't quite show how the 3D printed part was gonna work. The 2 3D printed pieces, unthread here, they have through holes so that the cable can run through all this stuff. These are gonna go onto the tenons of the wood. They're gonna be covered up by these pieces of steel, and then these steel rings are gonna go down here on the other end. Now all this stuff is different material, so we're gonna use 5-minute epoxy to put it all together. I got the polyurethane on both of these. They're looking good, but now we need to connect them together. And to do that, I'm gonna try bass guitar strings. You could probably use a steel cable. I just happen to have some old strings laying around, so we're gonna try these. We do have to take off the nut on the end of these because it's too big to go down through the hole that we cut on the inside of those pieces. So we're gonna try to tie the end of these into knots. Now that's gonna be kind of hard to do, so I'm not sure which one of these is gonna work. The thickest string may be too thick to tie into a small enough knot to fit on the inside of this. The smallest string may be too small, so we're just gonna try them out, see how it goes. We tried tying knots, that didn't work. We tried soldering, the solder wouldn't stick to this. So then we tried a ferrule, and that actually worked really well. I was able to crunch it down around the cable, but now it's just a little bit too wide, so we're gonna take it to the belt sander to flatten it out. Now to explain how this is gonna work, the holes on the inside of this, where they connect, are smaller than the holes on the outside. So from out here, we can feed this wire in. It's gonna come all the way through, and then that ferrule that we put on the end is gonna get caught right there. So now we gotta feed that wire through this one, and it'll come out the other end as well. Then we gotta figure out how to connect it so it won't come back through. So we need the wire to be a little bit shorter than the overall staff. So we're gonna line it up here with the end and then pull it in a couple of inches. And that's gonna tell us where we need to put the ferrule on this end. So we're gonna hold it in that place and slide the ferrule on. The wire is now captive in there. It works really well, moves freely. In fact, it moves so freely that it falls out if you turn it this way. So we need to plug the holes in both ends of the bar, and to do that, we're gonna cut off the head of a nail and glue it right inside that hole. All right, it's all done. Let's try it out. I'm extremely happy with how this thing came out. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I just wanted to make a prop, but this thing actually is kind of deadly. Made out of steel and wood, it's way stronger than I thought it would be, and I don't know what the original maker used, but the bass string is actually really strong too. Also, having a combination of metalworking, woodworking, and 3D printing all in the same project just kind of makes me happy. I'd love to know what you think about this one. If you have any other ideas for another way that the mechanism could work on the inside, it'd be cool to hear that. Leave those down in the comments. I've also got a whole bunch of other project videos of all different types that you may be interested in. Check some of those out, and don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. So we're gonna make, that's farts. This is the scarlet color. We're gonna pour color.
One, go.